Beena is an author of the book Trustworthy AI. She is the founder and CEO of Humans for AI and the head of Deloitte Global AI Institute. Beena is an award-winning senior executive with extensive global experience in AI, data, analytics, and digital transformation. You can, of course, view her full profile, of course, on our website. For all our audience joining from around the world, Beena will make a few introductory remarks, and then she'll be open to a Q&A session. So do post your questions in the chat, and I will do my best, of course, to bring them over into our discussion. Beena, it is my great pleasure to have you with us. So please tell us, in your opinion, what does trustworthy AI look like, and how do we go about achieving it?
Ayisha, firstly, thank you so much for having me at your event today. I heard some of the prior speakers, and it looks like a very, very relevant and well-organized session. So I am very glad to be here today. I think one of the reasons that I started talking about trustworthy AI, even though I'm a technologist about training, is I realized that, we were getting too lost in the clickbait headlines and, on the extreme ends of how AI could go wrong. Now, I'm not saying that AI cannot go wrong. There can be AI challenges, but there's also, some of the challenges can be addressed. It's not all doom and gloom. So I like to think about trustworthy AI as a wholesome concept which encompasses ethics, responsible AI, all the different terminologies that you hear in the arena of AI risk. And the reason being that if you don't trust AI, then nobody is going to use it, right? So for AI to reach its full potential, it has to be trustworthy. And when you think about trustworthiness, there are dimensions that you can define that can help us actually get to a solution, as opposed to getting lost in philosophical and marketing discussions. So I think about trustworthy AI in terms of a few different dimensions. By no means is it all encompassing. It is prudent to think about AI as a technology that is still evolving, and there are always going to be new risks and new challenges that come up with it. But here is what we can think as a baseline to get us started. So trustworthy AI for me, has a few dimensions like being unbiased, being fair, being transparent, explainable, being responsible, accountable, and reliable, robust, safe, secure. So all these dimensions may not be relevant for every use case. So what trustworthy AI means for you and your organization will depend not only on the industry that you're working in, but also the use case, right? And I can give you examples on, a lot of these different use cases. As you were saying in my intro, I have a broad range of experience across different industries. And that's why my perspective is more of, let's define trustworthy AI at the granularity of the use case, so that then you can solve for it, right? Bias, a huge problem, but it may not be relevant for every use case, right? It is relevant for when you use human level data. Transparency, again, it may not be relevant for every use case. It all depends on the application of the AI. So this event is so relevant, so timely, Ayisha, and I'm sure you'll hear it from more speakers, right? In terms of whether it's policy or regulation, it cannot be at this high level. It needs to go down to that granularity. And so I think starting with trustworthy AI at a granular level is the best way for us to solve for it.
Very, very interesting. And thanks. And so what I like is about, what does it mean for you depends on the use case that you are in. And I think that is quite. Now, Beena, you are here. We are representing, of course, we're at ETH Zurich. And there are, a lot of debates now and a lot of thinking with regards to how we can involve the actual scientists, the inventors, those that are creating this technology. How can we essentially, make them understand some of these topics that you're talking about? And given your experience, I'm sure that those that are listening and those who would join us even afterwards would be interested to know, those that are actually entering those fields, what can we really do to ensure that they are up to speed with some of these discussions? Are they really thinking about that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those classic scenarios of where, you are an expert in a certain area and you tend to focus on it, focus only on that, right? And unfortunately, we are at that time and space where you have to be more mindful of whatever research you're doing, right? You cannot just focus on all the positive things that research can build, but you have to think of all the ways it can go wrong, right? My favorite quote is from Jurassic Park on, just because your scientists could or they did without considering all the implications. I'm paraphrasing it here, but I think that is that key line for me, which we need to anchor all research, all applications of AI on, is not only think about the positive things that technology can do, but the negative things as the side effects, right? It is time for us to take responsibility. And, as a technologist by training, trust me, Ayisha, I fully understand it's very easy to focus on all the cool things, this new algorithm can do, or this new business model can do, or the research that you're focused on. But I think, you have to step up and be an adult and think about, proactively think about what happens if this research that I'm doing falls in the wrong hands. What happens if it is, going to be misused? It's not just about thinking, at the granular level or, once you develop something, but even before you design it, when you're ideating, I think it is important to proactively think about what is this going to drive more inequity? Is this going to leave certain populations behind? Is this going to cause more, mental health challenges? Yes, it can be a wonderful way to connect people, but, is this going to actually drive behavior that can cause harm? So I think you have to weave in the, thinking about the negative impacts of any AI solution that you might be building or any AI research that you might be doing, to have a checkpoint on what are the ways it could go wrong. Because the reality is, Ayisha, I think as researchers, as technologists, I don't think the intent is malicious. The intent is not to cause harm. But if you don't think about it, that powerful new research, the powerful new solution that you're building can cause harm. So, why not think about it proactively as soon as you come up with an idea, as soon as you are thinking about doing further research? Don't just focus on the positive outcomes. Think about the ways it can be misused.
Yeah, but just building on that, and before I move to maybe a couple of other questions I had, one of the ones for me would be, but that the proof is always in the pudding. So how is it that we should be having more programs, which are kind of multidisciplinary? Is it that we should be having, from a policy? Of course, I mean, we are in an AI policy summit. If I'm a regulator, if I am the government, what is it that I should be doing to ensure that happens? Because of course, you and I understand it, but I don't know if a 20-year-old who's studying data science is aware of it. So what could be the steps that we could take?
No, I get it. I have a 19-year-old, and they don't think, at that age, you're not thinking about it, right?
Yes.
And I think it is. It really, again, depends, right? What your role is. So I think as the adults, as the ones who are a little bit more farther ahead and know that this can cause harm, it's about changing the existing processes. I cannot speak to the exact process that's followed at every university to get research funding approval or to get scholarship, right? I think it needs to be a checkpoint in there that will check for it. I can talk to from an enterprise, from an organizational level, right? We all use project plans, right? We all use that initial slide that you're using has a big column which says what's the ROI on this, right? I think just adding another point in there, say, what are the ways that this could go wrong or could be misused? So if you are using some kind of a research approval process or a tool, I think that, that process change, right, needs to be done. And that can drive that change in behavior because, there is you need to go through a checklist. The other one, I would say, very important one, and which is kind of what you and your team are doing here, is raising that awareness, right? Making sure that, I've heard from the corporate world, I hear very often that, we've heard about all these, ethics and bias, but we don't really know how it's relevant for us, right? We don't know what to do. But it's just adding that one checkpoint in your process, making sure every employee is educated. If there is a AI program, add in a course on, trustworthy AI and why it's important. I think the first step is raising awareness. The second step is changing processes. And between doing these two, I think that sets us up for a future where, it becomes embedded in your DNA, right? And as soon as we start doing this, the future generations, the future group of researchers, scientists it's already part of the process and they've been educated on it. So I think that's the only way to make progress. It is not by just by having these discussions between experts. It's about translating into the tools and processes that's used. It's about providing training. It's by embedding it into existing curriculums.
Very good. So another one that came through, and actually that was something I wrote down while I was listening to one of the conversations that were happening on governance mechanisms, right, and policy. And as you know, of course, I mean there is a lot of discussions now happening in the EU. We are looking at actually even binding regulations coming, and other parts of the world. We had Singapore presenting, thinking about more slightly different approach. But somebody actually posted in the chat something which goes to what you just talked about a little bit, which is the biases, right? And they were talking about saying, well, and it is very specific because I think maybe it resonates less a little bit to, maybe in a country like Switzerland, but maybe more in the US. It's about the inclusion, and that was a very specific question, inclusion of people with race, people with having different race, and there's not much being done about that. And how do we include, people with diverse backgrounds? Because unless we do that, no matter whatever solutions we're coming up with are not necessarily going to be the ones that will have credibility and trust. Coming back to that. And have you seen the experience of that maybe a little bit in the US? Because I think those debates are, of course, a lot more, I think, active over there. I mean, they are over here as well. But what has been your experience with that?
Yeah, and it seems, again, you need to go down to the granularity. Meaning you cannot just say we need to be inclusive. We need to have diverse teams. Because there are so many dimensions of diversity, to your point, right? It's not just about gender, race, ethnicity. It's also about geographic background, cultural backgrounds, educational backgrounds. There are so many dimensions of diversity. So when you start looking at the AI solution that you're building, or the project that you're working on, or the research that you're planning to do, think about what are the different kinds of stakeholders you need. So, and make sure that, you are proactively building that level of stakeholders. And they don't need to be, from a corporate world, they don't need to be part of your core team, but they can be the ones who are reviewing the project, for example, or the ones who are testing. So say, for example, if you are building a marketing AI solution or, doing research in that space, then, you probably have to think about inclusion in terms of the target demographic, but also in terms of the demographics that, for positioning for the future. But here's the thing I would like to say, Ayisha, right? If that is being used to provide personalized marketing, that solution, the stakes are, in my mind, a little bit lower than compared to using that same AI solution or tool to provide personalized health diagnosis, right? So you have to weigh the stakes as well, and and see what kind of stakeholders you need in each case. When you're doing it for marketing, you probably need somebody with marketing expertise. When you're doing it for healthcare, you definitely need somebody with a medical background to be part of your team, or to be reviewing the work that you're doing, so that they bring in that subject matter expertise. So the only way we can solve for it is by looking at a granular level. Otherwise, inclusion is just too broad, right? There are so many dimensions to inclusion, right? So how do you actually action it? Is by looking at the actual use case, is by looking at the actual application and saying, these are the potential ones. And once you gather your first cohort, ask them, who else are we missing at the table? Have that discussion so that you can find ways to bring them into the discussion.
Great. Now, another question, and I think you mentioned foresight. Like we have to think in the future, and I think that is another point that came in as well, that we have to become better. And again, I'm talking once again in the context of governance, right? We're talking about, and one of the things which is a big debate. This is the big tension, right? Like, let's not come up with anything because this whole technology is moving. We don't know where it's going to go. Yeah, there are the other ones that say, well, we need to do something. We need to have some mechanisms in order for us to kind of make sure that we go in the right way in the future. So when you think about that, one of the things that came is we have to become very good with also foresight. Where is not only the technology going, but where is our society going? What are going to be the biggest challenges that are going to be coming our way? And here I would like to pick your brain a bit, because I think in terms of the future, in terms of AI going forward, what would you believe would be like some of the big challenges? I mean, currently, yes, we're looking at a micro level, right? We look at the bias, the algorithms, and but are we kind of missing the big picture? Are we not looking at something much more? So what would be your suggestions in terms of what regulators or people working in governance could think about in terms of forecasting some of those challenges that we don't see today?
Yeah, and I think one of the key aspects is we just have to accept that the regulations will never be able to keep up. Like to your point, the technology is moving so fast. There's massive investments going into the technology, and businesses are using it. There are researchers who are getting funded. So technology is going to grow so fast. So we've really moved away from that era of just relying on regulations. We have to think about self-regulating, whether it's a university or a for-profit organization. You have to think about the broader impact, right? And have that foresight, because we tend to think this is also new, and that this is this is not something that we can solve for because it's so big, but it can be solved. It can be solved, and you just have to look at history. Like, my bet is on humanity. The reality is, when cars were invented, there were no roads, there were no speed limits, there were no lanes defined. We didn't even have car seats till a few decades ago, right? So we've been through this as a human race, right? So these discussions that we have is going to help us move forward in defining those lanes, the speed limits, and having seat belts and so on. We're just living in this flux era where our generation gets to really shape, right? Lay out those lanes. And that's why we're having a discussion on how do you innovate, keep the speed going, but also think about the trustworthy aspect. So we have to accept that it's going to take its time. Regulations are going to come, but those regulations have to be thoughtful, right? It cannot be just, let's just ban this technology. It doesn't work that way. Let me give you an example. Facial recognition, right? Facial recognition can be highly biased and can cause huge problems. But if it's being used, say, in a law enforcement scenario to tag criminals, obviously we don't want any innocent person to be tagged. And in that case, you probably don't want to use that technology. But is it right to completely ban that technology? I don't think so, because that exact same technology in the exact same scenario is being currently used by nonprofits to identify and rescue kidnapping victims, human trafficking victims, right? Now, there might be biased, But if it is helping us rescue 40%, 60% more victims than we could without using the technology, should we be still using that technology or not? That's a discussion to have with the stakeholders. It's not just banning the technology, or it's not about one regulation that's going to fit all. It needs to be at the actual use level. I feel like I'm repeating this in every question, but even for regulation, even for governance, I think it has to be at that next level. It cannot be at that high level. We will not make progress if we continue those discussions. Those discussions are great for philosophers and marketers because they are clickbait headlines. But, as the ones who want to take action, I think you really, really have to go down to the granular level.
Right. Now, that's all very good, but I'm glad that we started getting some questions in there, and I think there's sort of follow up to what you're saying, and that's exactly what that when I talked about this tension, right? So there is this school of thought that says, well, self-regulations they didn't really work. I mean, look at what happens. I mean, in a bigger sense, look at what happens to the state of our planet, right? I mean, you leave it to to the private sector, and today we find ourselves in a real mess. So the question would be, what should be the way forward? Because if we leave it just that, and it doesn't work. If we do it too quickly, I have my own thoughts, but it'd be be good to hear yours on that one.
Yeah, no, self-regulation by itself is never going to work. Look, I have a 19-year-old, and I know none of his friends want to, they're all studying, AI or some form of technology, but they don't want to really talk about ethics. So it's not going to really work unless, we, start with the curriculum, the future generation, but, put the incentives there, right? And we're seeing that slowly now, Ayisha, in terms of, the kind of ESG goals that companies have, or that, we are seeing more of that happening in research funding as well, where, you have to fundamentally change the process as well. And as consumers, we have bigger power than we think, right? If you don't think a company is considering the ethical implications of AI, then you have a choice to not use it, right? You have a choice to not work for that organization. You have a choice to not work, do research at the specific university if they don't have these guidelines. I think at some point we have to take ownership as well. But there will be bad actors, right? There will be, I completely agree. And I saw some of the comments on self-regulation won't work. But, that's a starting point. That's a starting point for all of us to actually think about, I'm not saying we shouldn't do regulation, but we have to also start pushing back on the organizations that are not really adhering to those. We've seen organizations actually pull back on, say, racist chatbots or biased, algorithms. So we as consumers have to, start pushing back and raise awareness to actually drive that forward.
No, but I think in the end of the day, and I see also, of course, and that coming back, I mean, also the chat comment we have that, there are certain, and it goes back to what you said, it depends on the use case, right? It depends on what you're actually using the AI for. And then we have to look at it in that context. And I like the fact that you say it's granular. And if I link it back to what has been discussed during the course of the day, this concept of almost co-regulation, right? Where we will have to have some parts of that where the governments will have to come in, they will have to define, there will have to be some red lines, but then there are others where we will probably makes a lot more sense for the self-regulation, as long as that self-regulation to a certain extent is something that is followed or monitored, or there is oversight of that by the governments as well. So I think that is that would be maybe something. I don't know what you think about that concept.
Yeah, Ayisha, let me be very clear. I do think there should be regulations. I just think in the meantime we need to put the onus a little bit on the organizers, the organizations, the researchers. There has to be regulations. Again, regulations can be, two different aspects, right? If you go down to the use case, there are regulations in every industry and at use case level, right? It is extending the regulations based on the impact of AI. And then there will be new regulations that will be needed, which is very use cases that AI has created, or businesses that have been powered by AI. So, while the regulations are being worked on by the regulators and policymakers, you have to start, thinking about self-regulation. We cannot just wait, because these are high risk areas, so you have to, balance that act and start holding organizations, researchers accountable for these.
Yeah, but I think also following up from a comment here from Andreas talking about, we also discussed these trust labels, right? And that there is a lot of it's almost like an industry. Well, not in the case that we discussed, but more and more you've got this industry that is being developed, which is certifying algorithms, which is saying that this is correct, this is not correct. And I believe, going back to what you say, we have to think about a process also for that, so that consumer can actually see which label is the one that we should potentially work with, and which not, and what is the process, and what is the kind of checks and balances, coming back to your own words, that we need to have in place. So that one for me is very important. And I think another point that you said but came out also today, which now, since we are almost like reflections of the day coming through, because we're going to close now, it's also very much about, in the end of the day, private sector will to a certain extent be driven by their own customers. And that's actually what will probably happen as well. And we start to see, I mean, you talk about children, I have my own, and they don't necessarily want a car that is polluting a lot, right? So they are now changing, and they are looking for things that the customers of tomorrow are looking for ethical behavior. And I think that potentially is the biggest force we have to move the needle to the right way. One of them, if we're not going to go with hard law. Right.
No, there has to be hard law. I'm not saying there should be regulations. It will just take time. There is not as much investments going into regulation, creating regulations as policies, as much as going into creating new AI models or progressing AI, right? So that's where we have to hit that balance and start holding the second stream equally accountable.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other, we had a very interesting talk also from Yiri Batrati, who was basically talking about, looking at it from a geopolitical angle, and also saying that, we to a certain extent, we can't forget that we have to look at, the competition side of things as well. So US and EU versus maybe China or some others. And so we need to have all of this in mind before we go ahead. So lots to think about when you're approaching the AI policy space. But I think for me, what I would say is that the discussions, as you say, the raising awareness, to have more people involved. We're going to have a few other panels also on democratic engagement in the coming days. That would be something maybe to go forward. But, since we have not so much time, I want you to pass the floor once again to you to give us some final words, some final thoughts. And then, of course, hopefully we're going to be continuing the dialogue. Anyway.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. This was great. And hopefully, if one takeaway for this audience is, don't fall for the headlines. Yes, it can be risky, but there's a lot of work that's happening in the middle. So there is high risk areas, but always, caveat your question or your thought, or when you read a news article on, what is this relevant for every use case, or is it for specific use cases? Which are the highest risk? Let's focus on fixing those. And which are the dimensions of trustworthy AI, which is applicable to your use case, because you can make progress. There is not going to be one single rule or law that you have to follow for every use case. Just like, I'll go back to speed limits, right? It's different in every country. It's not going to be the same for every use case. So you have to, as the owners, as the researchers, as the policymakers, when you get down to that granularity level, you can actually solve for it. And the biggest power you have is that we're not forced to use any technology, right? So you have a choice to make on whether you want to support certain technologies which you think are unbiased, and whether you want to push back on those, and how do you prioritize as you go along.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I see that our chat is getting warmed up now, but unfortunately we have to be closing the day. But Beena, it was wonderful to have you. I think this was not would have loved to have it much longer, this conversation, but the time is short. I hope to, in any case, have you as part of our expert community going forward, and we will be continuing this dialogue. And just to say, it's 6 o'clock now, Swiss time, so I believe that I will have to announce the close of the first day of the AI Policy Summit. Please note that we start tomorrow at 1 p.m. Swiss time. And the theme for tomorrow is actually AI and justice. And we are thrilled to have collaborated with UNESCO to put together a fantastic program, including panel discussions among leading judges representing India, Egypt, United States, and Brazil. So we will also, of course, have tomorrow some individual presentations from leading academics and innovators. So I hope that you can join us. And as a reminder, you can find the full agenda for tomorrow's session and for the following days on our conference website. We will also post it now on the chat. And I wish you all a great, great day and see you all tomorrow. And all the best. And thank you very much, Beena, once again.